What's up guys, Rage Quitting here, and in today's video we're going to talk about the Sorcerer's defensive toolkit and how to deal with them so that you guys can bring them down in PvP. Let's go.
I'm just calling to say
Alright, so first of all, let's talk about the Sorc and the type of class that it is. So, is a hybrid class, meaning it can also play a healing spec. So, because of that, their baseline abilities have heals. Even the DPS sorcerers like Lightning and Madness also have their own self-healing, although it's not as strong as, obviously, the healer spec itself. It does have heals. So, let's talk about their heals for a little bit. So, Resurgence is an instant cast heal that heals over time. And then they also have Dark Heal, which is no cooldown, and it just costs force, and it has a cast time on it, and they have to stand still. But as long as they have the time to do this and the force in order to do this, they can heal themselves indefinitely, right? Outside from that, they have this other heal called Unnatural Preservation. So it's on a 25-second cooldown, gives them a chunk of health. They can't use it on anybody else. They can only use it on themselves. And if they're taking certain talents here, like this one, Unnatural Vigor, it increases their damage reduction by 15%, and it reduces the cooldown. This paired with another talent down here called Forbidden Knowledge, dealing damage with Chain Lightning, build stacks of blah blah blah, increasing the healing done by Unnatural Preservation and reducing its cooldown. So a Sorc that specs into this will have Unnatural Preservation coming up sooner than it normally would, and also giving it a little bit more health back as well. So the self-sustain on Sorcerers and Sages in general is pretty good. The other thing that they have here is Force Barrier that they just have to stand still to use, and you're basically immune to everything for 5 seconds, okay? And the longer that they stay inside of this barrier, the more of a little shield that they will get. If you see these stacks right here, the longer I stay in the barrier, I get these stacks of Force Barrier. Comes up to 4 stacks here. And then this shield that lasts, it can absorb some damage. So the longer that they stay in the barrier, that little shield that stays on them thereafter can absorb more. But like I was saying, with the self-heals here, the main thing that you want to do for Sorcs basically is to just not let them free cast. Let's just say, for example, there's a target dummy in here that we're going to use for an example. Let's say the Sorc is using line of sight and they are dealing damage, whatever, right? And then whenever they take damage, they just hide behind the line of sight. This is what I do pretty often. I'll hide behind the line of sight, get my healing back up, right? Heal myself, and then come back out and do more damage when it's safe to do so. Right, so the best thing you can do for a Sorc is just to honestly pressure them. If they're using line of sight and trying to be squarely around the map and trying to go unnoticed or trying to make it hard because they're behind line of sight and things like that, every time they go behind the line of sight, they're over here healing up. What you want to do is not afford them that luxury of just being able to duck in and out of line of sight. So put pressure on the Sorc, move into their position as long as they don't, juke you and push you off of ledges and stuff like that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. In order to stop their healing sustain and to stop them from free casting, you need to put pressure on them first and foremost. That might seem pretty obvious, but anyway, we'll just move on to the next point here. So static barrier is this little bubble right here. So they can put this on themselves once every 20 seconds. They can also put it on friendly allies, but there's this debuff, deionized. So they can only do this once every 20 seconds. And then also the ability itself just gives you 5% damage reduction when you're under the effect of deionized. So once you put the barrier on yourself, while you have this barrier on, you have 5% damage reduction, right? So other damage reduction abilities that they have is Cloud Mine on a 45-second cooldown, if they choose to talent enter this, which most of them will be. 25% damage reduction for 6 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. Usually this is paired with, if, really heavy incoming damage is coming, it's paired with a Warzone Adrenal for 15% more damage reduction. And then if they use their barrier, that's 5% more damage reduction. And then if they have Unnatural Preservation with Unnatural Vigor, that's 15% more damage reduction. So it's a lot of damage reduction for a little bit of time. So one thing you guys need to be aware of with the static barrier is this is mostly true for the healing specs of Sage and Sorc. Typically, a lot of them will take backlash, so static barriers you place on yourself will erupt in a flash of light when they end, blinding up to 8 nearby enemies for 3 seconds. So when you're chasing down a Sorc and a Sage for the first time in the war zone and you see them pop this barrier, you need to make a mental note of what the name of that character is if there's more than one of them in the war zone, and you need to test to see if they're running said barrier with the placing them on themselves will erupt in a flash of light blinding nearby enemies. So if there's multiple people attacking it, you'll probably find out right away because it'll get broken through, and then you'll see whether or not the flash will then blind, you know, like that. But if you're the only one on target, and especially if you're melee, you need to try and break the bubble from range. Do not be in melee range. Back off a little bit and use skills that have range on them to break the barrier first to find out if it's gonna blind you, and then go for the rest of it, okay? And typically the healers will be using this bubble because it just helps them kite. If you allow yourself to be hit with that bubble and nobody else is attacking you, then you're gonna be CC'd for 3 seconds and you're gonna allow them time to reposition. So always try to break the barrier with a ranged attack first so that you can follow up without being CC'd, okay? The next thing I want to talk about is a pretty big one, force speed. A lot of people, I mean, you don't really look at this as a defensive ability, you know, you kind of look at it as a mobility skill, but it's both, right? Because for one, if they're taking immersion, force speed will remove all movement impairing effects and grant immunity to them for the duration. So this means, for example, I typically play Marauder, so this comes in handy when I'm going to use my leap on them. Any type of gap closer that you have, especially one that targets them, assassins have a teleport that they can port to people. Operatives and scoundrels have the same thing. They can, you know, hollow traverse, they can teleport onto things. Warriors have leaps. If you want to make sure that your leap is going to get you to the target that is force speeding, you need to make sure you wait for the force speed to end before you leap, because if I use force speed from here, it can reach from here all the way to here, right? If I saw that they were force speeding and then I tried to leap on them midway through, well, my leap is going to take me here, but then the Sorc is going to keep going and then they'll be here. So you need to, you know, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage again by just not waiting, because they're still able to kite you from here, right? So make sure that you wait for the full duration force speed to end if you plan on leaping on them, so that you can jump right on top of them when their force speed ends, and then you won't be you know, left behind. The other thing here we want to talk about is overload. So overload is a push. It's AoE push in front of their body in a cone. A lot of unskilled sorcerers will resort to using this push almost immediately when they get jumped on. So a really easy way to counter like a more inexperienced Sorc, I guess, would just to run behind them. So as soon as you, let's say we just talked about the force speed thing. Let's talk about you leap on them right after they're done force speeding, and a lot of times they'll try to just do this, right, and push you away. But as soon as you land the force, you know, the leap or the hollow traverse, whatever, just get behind them real quick, because maybe 7 out of 10 Sorcs will panic and try to push you away. But if you step behind them, they will miss, and then now they're down 2 cooldowns, right? You just beat their force speed by waiting for it to fully end before you jumped on them, and then you beat their overload push by moving behind them. So they're down 2 cooldowns, whereas you only used 1. All right, and then the other one we want to talk about here is phase walk. So activating this ability marks your current location for 10 minutes. So they can put this little thing down on the ground, and as long as they're inside of the range of it, I'm going to move away from it to see how far it is, and you can tell how far it is by moving away. Okay, so right here. So just about this is the distance that I'm away from it here. So as long as they're fighting within this range, and they remember where their teleport is, you know, if they ever get in trouble, they can just boop, teleport right back to the same spot. So this comes with experience, but typically in certain maps, you know, there's favorite places where Sorcs put down their phase walks. Of course, you can get pretty creative with this, but if you had to take a guess, you know, at the very start of a match, you probably know where people are setting their phase walks, right? Like in Civil War, for example, as soon as you drop down into the mid area, a lot of them move over to one side or the other and put their phase walks behind the wall, right? So if they ever get in trouble, they port, and then you know exactly where they are, okay? I'm not saying this is true for all the Sorcs, obviously, because you can put this literally anywhere. But, you know, for most maps, there's like a general spot that people tend to put their phase walks, and you can take a good guess as to where they are when they vanish, right? And then you can chase them down and kill them. The other thing, just to be aware, though, of Sorcs, you know, we already talked about overload, but good Sorcs can, although, you know, you put pressure on them to try and get them down or whatever, right? Definitely putting pressure on the Sorc will inhibit the damage that they deal, because they're having to kite and deal damage at the same time. but don't get trolled into chasing them into unfavorable places. Okay, so for example, on ledges, right? Especially if you as a class don't have a push, right? So what I like to do in especially in the Hutball, the Vanden Hutball match, you know how on the sides of the maps have the healing nodes and the damage nodes on the edges. If a class that's chasing me that doesn't have a push, like maybe like an operative or a marauder or something, or PTs, and they really want me dead, I'll run over to the side over there purposely and stand by like that healing node ledge, and if they want to come get me, they have to come, right? Especially if they're melee, so they have to come over to me on the ledge, and then when they do, push them off the ledge, right? So just be aware of where your placement is on the map, so that you don't get trolled into getting pushed off of ledges from the Sorc that's, you know, kiting you around. All right, and then the last one here we're going to talk about is the barrier. We kind of touched on it before, but this gives you, you know, they're immune to everything for 5 seconds, all right? So many people deal damage into this barrier, and I don't know why, because it's not going to do anything. But if they are taking this talent here, Surging Speed, just be aware that they might be able to force speed again. So for example, I can force speed and then pop this barrier, and then as soon as I come out of the barrier, I can force speed again. So that's just, you know, not a huge deal, but it's just something to be aware of if you don't have any mobility to chase after that, you know, to catch up with them or whatever. Just be aware, if they had just used force speed and then popped into barrier, they might be able to force speed again after that. All right, guys, and then let's talk about what abilities to interrupt. All right, there's only so many abilities that you can interrupt anyway. And I'm guessing, like, most players, especially if you're new playing PvP, I'm gonna guess that you don't really use your interrupts at all. But if you were to choose 2 abilities here, I would say either Thundering Blast or Crushing Darkness, okay? Reason being is Thundering Blast is the biggest hitting ability from Lightning Sorcerer on a very, very low cooldown, and it lets them do their Chain Lightnings instantly. So stopping a Thundering Blast will then stop the follow-up Chain Lightning as a result. And if they are using the tactical Stormwatch, let me put Stormwatch on first, and then the other one is Crushing Darkness, right? So either Thundering Blast or Crushing Darkness. You really want to be interrupting these 2 abilities here, okay? And reason being is if they're using the Stormwatch tactical, just watch how much damage this does. I'm only going to do 2 abilities. I'm going to start the tactical by using Lightning Flash, and then I'm going to hardcast the Crushing Darkness, and then watch all this passive damage that comes through. Okay, all that damage is just from Crushing Darkness. So if they're playing Stormwatch, this is a really big ability to interrupt. But it kind of, you'll have to notice if they're using it or not. But regardless, this is a good ability to interrupt. It's because if they're running the other tactical, Aaron's Haste, you're not going to be able to interrupt Thundering Blast for the most part if they're using Force Speed, because when they use Force Speed, like this, now Thundering Blast is instant. So you're not going to be able to interrupt that anyway, okay? So you should always look to interrupt these Crushing Darknesses all the time. And if you can, also interrupt the Thundering Blast, okay? Those 2 skills, all right? If we're going to switch into the Madness spec here, I have to exit combat 1 second. Did I exit combat? I did. Okay, so if we're going to switch into Madness, I have a loadout so I don't mess up all my stuff here. So the ability you want to interrupt with Madness is Force Leech, primary ability. And if you can't, secondary ability would be the Force Lightning. Okay, and reason being is because Force Lightning, a full channeled Force Lightning, will then give them instant cast Demolish. Okay, so, and that does a, you know, respectable amount of damage. Force Leech is the biggest one because if they use their Polarity Shift and Force Speed with it, or even the Recklessness, you know, usually they'll use these abilities to buff up their Force Leech. It'll deal good damage and it will heal them. So you want to stop yourself from taking damage. You want to stop them from getting some heals back. This is the ability to interrupt right here. Okay. All right, guys. Lastly, the thing that you want to remember with Sorcs too is with your own class, make sure that you know which abilities gets you out of roots and slows, okay? Because the primary way, other than Force Speed and the push, is to slow you and root you, okay? Well, they don't have Force Slow anymore, unfortunately, but they still do have roots. So in the Madness spec, they have Creeping Terror, paralyzes the target in fear, blah, 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 immobilizing it for 2 seconds. The immobilizing effect can occur once every 9 seconds. So every 9 seconds, they can root a target for 2 seconds with Creeping Terror. And this is on a, it doesn't have a cooldown. So as long as they're inside or outside of that 9-second internal cooldown, they can throw this down as a root. So know which abilities that you have can get you out of roots and slows. Also, because they overload the push, after they push you away, it'll also, immobilize you for 5 seconds. Okay. Direct damage after 2 seconds will end the immobilize effect prematurely, but no matter what, you will be immobilized for 2 seconds. All right. Unless you're not being touched at all, then you'll be immobilized for 5 seconds, which gives them plenty of time to kite away from you. So with Madness, you have Creeping Terror, and they have the immobilize with Thundering Blast, and that's if they're taking this talent point here, which I think most of them are. I typically do, but just be aware of that, okay? I think I pretty much covered everything. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you guys on another one. Peace.
I'm just calling to say I